Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the second session of ETRC Online. My name is Marie. I'm with Commodities People. I look after our energy trading and commodity trading events in Europe. And it's my pleasure to be welcoming on the virtual stage a great panel of speakers to discuss what's coming in terms of financial regulations. Shamsi, Paul, Aviv, welcome. Could you please introduce yourselves for our audience? Starting with you, Shamsi?
Hi, so my name is Shamsi Khan. I'm currently Chief Compliance Officer of Powertica Commodities. I've been in the regulatory compliance world for about 15 years and specialize in global commodity and energy regulation.
Brilliant, thanks. And Paul?
Afternoon. My name is Paul Renson. I'm Director of Strategy at Delta Conics. We're a transaction regulatory reporting provider covering global regs, Swiss-based.
Thank you very much, Paul. Welcome. And last but not least, Aviv.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aviv Handler. I run ETR Advisory. We're a small consultancy and we specialize in the what I call financial style rules applying to energy and commodity trading. So REMIT, EMIR, MiFID II and MAR. I've been doing this for quite a few years as well, about 15 ETRs, 13 years old.
All right, thank you very much. So, as I said, we gathered to discuss the financial regulations agenda of 2026 and beyond. So, obviously, there's loads to discuss. So, we have prepared some questions for our panelists, but please also know that the panel welcomes questions from the audience. So, please do post yours in the Q&A box. We'll take some time at the end of the session to answer as many as we can. So, let's just dive in. And we'll start with actually asking our first poll to the audience. And this poll is around your focus at the moment. So let me just pull that in.
Can we vote?
Please be my guest, Paul. So the question is, what are you focusing on at the moment? MiFID II position limits, MiFID II ancillary activity exemption, EMIR 3, algo trading, reporting, or market abuse. So as our viewers vote, let me ask the panelists the first question. So we are seeing a massive push for simplification from ESMA, yet firms are still grappling with dual reporting and technical standards changes. Is the regulatory burden actually decreasing, or are we just shifting the complexity to different areas? Shamsi, do you want to start?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, it's good that regulation and regulators are looking for simplification. It shows that they've heard the industry and also understand that risks can be mitigated whilst having a simpler framework. And I think the industry welcomes that. I think we should be conscious that we're in a state of change. So we're seeing pockets of simplification. And I think that makes it a little bit difficult for compliance functions to deal with when there's ever so slightly changing and differing regimes. However, I don't think it's a shift. I don't think, because we're doing less here, we're suddenly doing more here. Well, not yet anyway. So I think, if we are on this trajectory, it should be a good one, but unfortunately we're just currently in a pain point of going through that transition.
Yes. Aviv, Paul, anything to add to that opening statement?
So I'd say on the complexity of reporting side, I don't think it is getting simpler at the moment for us in energy and commodities. It's probably getting more complex. So we've got REMIT 2 reporting changes coming, and while there are some removals, there's also like other fundamental data, there's also the addition of, say, exposure reporting. The call for evidence from ESMA has the intent, and genuine intent, I'd say, of simplification for financial counterparties in particular, across the three rules that it focuses on. It's a long-term project and quite ambitious. So let's see if that results in simplification at the end, but that's some way off. I would think that the energy side of that under remit might require yet another wave of changes in many years' time. But yeah, I would say that while that intent is there, it's not getting less complex at the moment.
All right.
So
Paul?
just, I agree with my esteemed panelists. Basically, I think what we've been on is a careening horse for the last X years, and at the moment we're just slowing that horse up a bit. So we are being given a time to evaluate what was a fundamental change across the financial side. Simplification would be a wonderful thing. The complexification, which Viv introduced me to as a word a few weeks ago, I think what had got to a tipping point. And I think if you look at the call of evidence, MIFIR, the review of MIFID was careering very, very close to being a mere 3 point whatever times 2. And I think what we're being allowed now is just to sit back and to evaluate. What it fundamentally doesn't mean is that there's any less focus on reporting. In fact, it will allow the regulators to ask the underlying market participants to actually fulfill what they want to happen on the obligation. So I think it's going to be a time of internal review and the ability to look and demonstrate and show the controls in place rather than having to change the number of fields you're reporting every 2 years or so. So a sensible breather.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's just see what our viewers are saying in terms of their focus at the moment. Hopefully you can see the results now. Reporting is first, 31%. Then quite close, we have market abuse, 28%. And then the rest, well, quite close to each other. Any comments on that? Is that something you were expected?
Yeah, I think it resonates. Reporting is high volume, has its complexity, especially work in multiple jurisdictions. Market abuse is something that we have to take obviously very seriously as we become more entrepreneurial as an industry. So does our surveillance and our monitoring frameworks as well. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So part of these, of course, we will be covering today. So starting with actually EMIR REFIT, and on that, actually, here comes our second poll. Let me just manage it. 1 second. Bit of technical difficulty. There you go. So the question is around the new fields basically that will need to be reported from next month. So how ready are you to start reporting the 64 additional reconciliation fields next month? So let's give our viewers a couple of minutes to vote on that. And while they do that, let me turn to you, Paul. So we are seeing now the second wave of additional reconciliation fields going live next month, as I was saying. Are companies ready to handle this more complex requirement, in your opinion? What are you seeing?
I think it's the same across all of these things. Some are, and the majority possibly have still got some pain to go through. Just generally talking, not just energy, but just across all assets. There's been to a number of discussion areas around this. It's very much deemed that the more complex side of reconciliation was kicked down the road, and refit is the gift that just keeps giving. And so we will see that now, because obviously valuations are part of this next tranche, this next wave. There are some fundamental issues there with counterparties being able to agree on model, etc., of how to do the reconciliation around particular fields. And I think there's a general feeling that it might be slightly chaotic to start with. So we've had 2 years of trying to bed refit in, get the reconciliations down, the match, etc. And I think we're probably in a position where, for a few months anyway, there will be some uncertainty again in the market. And the statistics won't look as pretty. But there are entities that tackled this early on and have been doing, have been running through the data sets, etc. So it's just the same as always. I think the point being is we can expect some turbulence for a period of time after April.
Well, let's see what people are saying, actually. And I believe this was to be expected, but you'll tell me. Significant gaps remain is the top answer. Half of the people watching are voting for that, and then on track but tight, and then very small portion, 13%, fully ready. I guess this is you're not surprised by that, right?
No, of course. It's like when you put your homework off. You get a few days of feeling great, and because you don't have to do it, and then Sunday night rolls around, and hell, you've still got to do it for Monday morning, and that's where we are. We're at Sunday night for reconciliation for EMIR refit, and you can never put Monday off.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm turning to you, Aviv, with this question around EMIR 3. So the final draft RTS for EMIR 3 clearing threshold was recently released. For the energy and commodity firms, what is the most significant hidden challenge in transitioning to these new aggregate and cleared position measures?
Well, so first of all, just to be clear, so this is the part of EMIR 3 about clearing thresholds. EMIR 3, for those who are not aware, is a much bigger exercise that mainly applies to financial firms around where you clear and having to have an active account. And yet the requirement that's being proposed that's likely to go ahead is to do two things for non-financial counterparties. One is to calculate the clearing threshold only for positions which are in a place that's not cleared, that are not cleared by a recognised clearer. So this is a change to what we have now, where if something is not risk reducing, it needs to be on a recognised regulated market for it to be removed. Now, even if it's not on a recognised regulated market, if you clear it using a recognised CCP, then you can remove it, even for an off-venue position. So that gives a lot more flexibility to NFCs. Secondly, it is likely to be calculated on an entity-by-entity basis, which for many people will be quite useful. So the first change, in particular, solves a problem around one of the two in the wider commodities spheres, regulated markets not being recognised by the EU. So now there's a way of removing those positions from the calculation. And the second, moving to an entity-by-entity basis, also means that it is easier to meet the requirements to be an NFC minus. So neither of those are necessarily challenges. They're both good things. They both allow us to address challenges of remaining under the threshold, I would argue. What's the challenge? It's the usual challenge of changing the calculation. The draft proposes some flexibility in terms of when you do the calculation. So at the moment we have to do the calculation once a year, which we'll still also have to do. But there's talk of if you've already done the calculation using the old method, you have a year to do it under the new method if you want. Of course, and that's just to give you time to prepare and do all of that sort of thing. So I'd say challenge-wise, the pros for most companies will certainly outweigh the cons. The complexity, which I think we'll talk about in the next question as well, is more around we have 3 jurisdictions now in Europe doing different things. We now have the EU, we have the UK, and the FCA have just opened a consultation on changing their clearing threshold to 5 billion euros, and Switzerland still has the 30-day calculation. So if you have entities in all of those places, life becomes rather complex.
Yeah, well, you're giving me a good segue to the next question, indeed, Aviv. So as the UK and EU methodology for clearing threshold and Switzerland as well continue to drift apart, especially with the UK maintaining its current EMIR refit stance, how should cross-border firms manage the operational risk of falling under two or three different commercial hedging definitions? Perhaps, Shamsi, you want to enlighten us?
Yeah, so I think just focusing on EMIR and the change in the clearing threshold calculation, as Aviv alluded, in terms of if you're just operating within Europe, actually this also relates to the simplification point. Doing a calculation for cleared versus uncleared is simpler, and it allows more flexibility. As Aviv rightly pointed out, the complexity is then divergence, which has always been an issue since Brexit for UK firms and so on. And so in terms of, what kind of needs to happen is, first of all, a firm needs to make sure that they're actually on top of the regulatory changes. They are getting information directly from FCA, ESMA, etc. Because, for example, if you take the UK update, it kind of came into the inboxes and it was a small paragraph for the increase of 5 billion for the clearing threshold. So you do need to make sure that you have adequate horizon scanning. And then you kind of need to make sure that you understand the changes per your business lines and your geographies. And then that's the only way that I guess you can really kind of manage the divergences and the timelines. So, for example, we will be in a place where the European EMIR clearing threshold is changing, but the FCA one isn't changing. It's still on a group OTC spec basis, but then the FCA also has an increase of 5 billion. So each firm just needs to make sure that they really understand what the lay of the land is at that point in time. And I'm sure, as other compliance officers will agree with me, every time you reopen the calculation, you recheck what's in place and what's not in place. You can't rely on the information that you even had really from a month ago. You really do have to be diligent on that side. And then I think, in order to manage divergence a little bit more for the firms that have capacity or are big enough or have trade associations, you can always speak with the regulators, respond to consultations, give them information of how difficult it is to manage that divergence and see if, regulators have appetite to kind of pick up on those issues and see if they can do anything on their side as well.
Right, thank you. Paul, anything to add on this?
No, there was no room left. That's wonderful answers.
All right, thank you. So we're moving to market conduct and reporting part of our discussion now. And that's a question for Aviv. So market conduct oversight is becoming more data-driven with the bar rising for stores. Are we seeing regulators move towards a zero tolerance policy for technical breaches, or is there still room for dialogue on intent, let's say?
First of all, let's remember this is a talk about, or this is a panel on financial regulation. I'd say, those in the energy markets are now under both Remit 2 and MAR for stores. And I'd say for those in the energy markets, most of the action is under Remit 2. We don't, there is now this expectation or requirement to submit stores. We see a lot of fines, a lot of regulatory activity there. Now, in July, it's the 10th anniversary of MAR. MAR started, I would say, the trend of implementing surveillance systems in the energy and commodities markets. Not that nobody had a system before, but it certainly increased when MAR came in and continues to do so with Remit 2 and other things. Is the bar being raised? Yes, it's always being raised. In our markets, it's probably being raised more on the Remit side than under MAR, but it's not that it's not being raised under MAR either, is how I would put it.
All right, Shamsi, anything from a market participant point of view?
Yeah, I mean, Aviv is right to kind of split between the financial and the non-financial. However, I guess technically when you implement surveillance systems, then it is more data-driven because you've got more alerts. However, I don't think it's all about numbers. I think it's really kind of how are you appropriately identifying and managing the risks that relate to your firm. And so I think everything relies on a really good kind of market abuse risk assessment, and then having a trail of how you went from measuring your risk to putting in place the appropriate controls, policies, governance, etc. And when it comes to stores, the technical definition is anything suspicious, and so you need to ensure that once it's deemed suspicious, you've got the 4-week clock running. Well, that's on Remit in particular. But I don't think it's a case of, oh, you have an alert, you need to send a store. It's not as simple as that. You really do need to have evidence and the appropriate arrangements to be able to discuss the risk that's in place as well.
Indeed. Now, one of the biggest topics in financial regulations reporting at the moment is the call for evidence from ESMA. We actually have a question for our audience on this. Let's just pull that up. Thank you very much. So how do you think the call for evidence on transaction reporting will impact you? I haven't heard of it. I don't know anything about it. It's going to make life harder. It's going to make life easier. Or I heard I will never have to report ever again. So please, please vote, and we'll have a look at the results in a minute. And in the meantime, let me go to Shamsi for the first question on the call for evidence. So. ESMA's call for evidence on streamlining reporting has teased the sort of report once principle. Realistically, how far away are we from a world where a single trade data set satisfies MiFIR, EMIR, and REMIT all at the same time?
I think we're far away. The other guys might say differently. And it goes back to the point where I think, regulators do understand that firms are burdened with reporting regimes and often kind of repeating the same information, and the scope is overlapping, etc. So it's good to see that, they are putting out papers to allude to that. But I haven't seen, significant headway into doing that. And if anything, kind of the risk is then are all firms then subject to a higher standard of reporting? So a lot of commodity firms don't have to report under MiFID, and they report under EMIR and REMIT. However, if we start aligning REMIT with the MiFID reporting, etc., it's not really kind of, I would say, appropriate for these types of firms. So I think we're really early stages.
Paul, Aviv, anything to complete on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in ahead of Aviv because I'm sure he could talk for a long time on this, and I'm sure I could as well. But this is a massive topic. So obviously we've got the labels of 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and what you're talking about here is the extremis of 2B. And I don't think it will ever happen. I think it's probably already been thrown out as an idea, brilliant as it was. The idea of REMIT and MiFID and EMIR, it's just not going to happen. They're just different horses for entirely different races. And I think, even looking at what is the goal of the call for evidence, which when we alluded to it the first, which is that one is to take stock. Where are we? The other is simplification, reduction in cost, reduction in burden. And so if we were starting today and there was a greenfield site, it's a brilliant idea, but we're not. We're starting from very complex systems that do different things for different obligations. And we've already invested an enormous amount. I think there's a great deal of benefit in getting the actual regimes as they stand at the moment right, and not rewriting them over and over again. I think that is a key part of it. I think the idea of report once for EMIR and MiFIR, as Shamsi said, there are duplication of fields. And some of the fields aren't necessary for the goal of that regulation, or less necessary for the goal. And I think some sort of rationalization would be excellent. But we're into 2A here on the model, and 2A has a lead time of 5+ years. So this is, this is the kind of thing that our children might be coming to terms with, Shamsi aside, rather than Aviv and I, basically, anyway. So I think these are lofty goals. I think that we're on the bottom of some ladders, and I think we'll probably go 1A, we'll evaluate, we'll iterate, and if everything looks right, we'll move to 2A. I think the B's are probably out. I think we're on the path of A, is my view of where we are.
All right. Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but just for the sake of discussion, if we were to move to a report once model, which regulation provides the best base for that data? should it be the heavy-duty EMIR MiFID standard, or is MiFID better suited for the high-frequency trading world, for instance? Aviv, do you have Aviv or Paul, actually, if you want to continue?
Well,
I'll let Avi. I've spoken long enough.
Yeah, so I guess it depends what we're using the data for. So there's a reason why the data streams were made separately to begin with, which is that they serve different purposes. It so happens that we're reporting the same thing twice. So if you are in MiFID and you have to do MiFIR and EMIR, one is used for more market abuse and fast-moving stuff, and one's used for systemic risk. So if you remain under both of those regulations going forward, you would just end up with a combined data model where you never have to report anything twice. But what you're reporting is a superset. If you think about a Venn diagram, you have EMIR and MiFIR, and at the moment there's things that intersect, and if we move them together, there's an intersection in the middle. Well, all this means, really, after all this complexity, is that you would only have to report the bit in the middle once rather than twice. But the requirements of those rules still remain. Now, if we're an NFC, we only have to do EMIR. So what that will look like is an interesting question. We might find some relief out of this process as NFCs. It remains to be seen, I would say. But the original purpose has to carry on. Another thing to think about, actually, is that as this is a long process, which will take, I think they talk about 5 to 7 years. So by the time you get to the end of the 7 years, you're 25 years away from the events that led to the rules. So that's quite a long time to come up with an optimal model. And who knows what other events will happen afterwards. Generally regulations come after something that happened in the market. So we now have LNG same-day reporting under REMIT, which is because of what happened in 2022. So 25 years later, who knows what other reporting we'll be looking at. That's an interesting thing to think about as well.
Indeed, thanks for pointing that out. Actually, that makes one wonder. Indeed, could we perhaps have the results from the poll that we've asked about the call for evidence? Okay,
that's interesting. So we might want to fill in on what we've been talking about: 1A, 1B, 2A, and 2B. We might want to explain it. Given the results of this part, and Paul, quick summary. Me or you? Or Samzid? Who wants to explain the call for evidence? So just as background, last year ESMA ran a call for evidence to look at merging the three main reports that are carried out by financial institutions, being EMIR, MiFIR, and SFTR, because there is a lot of overlap. And they proposed 4 different methodologies for eventually merging them. With the ones being simpler and not having one big super schema, and the 2s being having one big super schema, and the A's being just those 3 rules, and the B being others. So therefore 1A is the least ambitious and 2B is the most. And this is part of a long discussion and process, which will hopefully lead to simplification. The objective by ESMA is to reduce costs for large financial institutions by 25% and smaller ones by 35%, with a reduction for NFCs as well in an unspecified way. That's what it's about.
Very, very kind of them to come up with those figures. Very nice figures, round figures.
They are quite round.
Thank you for that. Thanks a lot for that. Perhaps
I'd like to know who the 4% is that they never had to report again.
Yeah, well, they can.
It's
they
one
can
person.
Say something on the chat if they want to.
It's one person. Yeah.
So, just moving on and looking at it from a different angle. So, ESMA is positioning itself more as a data hub for national competent authorities, basically. So, does this centralization actually reduce the burden for the firm, or does it just add another layer of validation rules that we have to pass before the trade is accepted? Paul, what's your take on that?
I think it's very interesting. I think one of the angles coming out of this is the ESMA's data strategy paper that they put out most years. And so the one this year was very much looking at a centralization of the data, and politics is getting into this. So this is slightly geopolitical, the idea that data in Europe remains in Europe. and that ESMA is the best to be able to control that. But it does mean that you're disintermediating a model that already exists and is heavily invested in, especially on the EMEA side. So you're disintermediating the TRs, and on the MIFIA side, you're disintermediating the ARMs, who do valid jobs, whether you appreciate what they do. It's like one of those things, once it's gone, you probably would appreciate it more than what it's got. But they are central to the model at the moment, and ESMA sits above it and gets fed and gets the information through. The NCAs being slightly different, and the mapping of the data through in different routes. So changing that in an overarching model that says we're going to simplify, we're going to reduce cost burden, we're going to do X, again comes down to a feeling. Again, if this was day one, that would be an interesting idea. In reality, it's difficult to see how that supports that reduction in cost, reduction in burden, simplification model. Would it be a good idea? I don't know, to be honest. I think that competition is good in these areas, especially around investment, and the TRs and the ARMs having to compete with each other commercially to provide the best services. I think works quite well. I think it's not a perfect model, as we've seen from recent finds of one of the TRs. There are holes and remediation to be done. So yeah, I think I think they're trying to solve a problem that might not be solvable.
Okay. Perhaps now looking into the divergence element of this, because there is always a divergence element to look at. So the FCA in the UK is also looking at simplification, but their bold proposals, like eliminating certain fields entirely, differ from ESMA's approach. So are we risking a simplicity paradox where the EU is simpler, the UK is simpler, but then cross-border firms have to build two different systems because they don't align? Shamsi, what's your take on that?
There's always the risk of that. I think since divergence took place, slight changes means you have to, and then a multitude of slight changes, and then a big change, which makes the divergence get difficult. It is a risk in the sense that we move further and further apart from each other, and then you are having to maintain two different regulatory regimes, reporting regimes. In terms of systems, potentially, I guess reporting is all about data capture and spitting out again. So I'm not really sure about that unless it's the RRMs and so on. But the risk is always there.
Anything to add on that, Aviv, perhaps?
Yes, there is that risk. I guess the question is what proportion of firms are in two locations. So, certainly in terms of financial regulation, the issue mainly applies if you have entities in more than one jurisdiction. So if you are, for example, the FCA, your first concern would be the firms that you authorise and that are in your jurisdiction. Similarly for ESMA. So yes, divergence is an issue, and I always thought REFIT was an attempt to merge. The simplification goes in the opposite way. It's a paradox. So it's just a paradox, and it is what it is. There isn't always an answer. Sometimes the majority of firms aren't cross-border firms; they're smaller firms. Certainly in our sector, they're not in two jurisdictions. So I guess you just have to solve for them.
Right. Well, now there is a topic that has come up while we were doing the research for this session, and that is the Gas Market Task Force. They've released their latest considerations, and in the context of the 2026 energy landscape, what is their most controversial recommendation for how we manage security, supply security, versus financial transparency? I believe, Shamsi, you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the Gas Market Task Force was essentially put together following the 2022 energy crisis, looking into kind of very high gas prices, and essentially it's a task force to really delve into what happened, why it happened, and how we can make sure it never happens again. 26 might not be the best year to test that, or the best year to test that, but we'll see. And I think in the context of financial regulations, the concerns of the industry were people who have been brought together to look at the gas markets may be putting out proposals and potential legislative kind of changes to, in particular, the MiFID II ancillary activities exemption that a lot of commodity participants use to be exempt from being a MiFID investment firm. And I guess the initial concern was kind of, if you are in charge of looking at physical economics of a commodity, how can you then kind of respond on a financial piece of legislation? However, I think since the initial kind of concerns, it's been taken on board that this risk has kind of been taken on board. So my understanding is that actually the Gas Market Task Force will not propose changes on the MiFID ancillary activities exemption. The report will be coming out later this year, around April. Obviously, there's always a risk that this is what we hear and something else has come out in the report, but I think it's unlikely that these two worlds kind of will be colliding as much as we thought they would.
All right, well, thanks for that. We'll be watching it indeed to see what exactly comes out of that report. All right, now we're reaching the end of the session. I just have one question left for you before we answer a few of the questions that have come in from our audience. So looking ahead to September, what do you think is the sleeper regulation, something not currently on the front page, let's say, that you think will be the biggest talking point at ETRC in person, for instance? Who wants to go first? Aviv, do you want to start?
Well, I think the biggest talking point at ETRC won't be a sleeper regulation. It'll be an awake regulation, probably around remit to reporting. Sleeper ones, I mean, it depends how well it's sleeping. So, the real sleeper ones I don't know anything about because they're sleepers. They wouldn't be very good at sleeping. I don't know. I do think it would be interesting to see what people have in mind, even with what the Gas Market Task Force say in terms of the future of the ancillary activity test. Let's see what hits us on that level. Maybe that's a sleeper.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
I don't think sleeping. Basically, I think we've talked about it. I think it'll be call for evidence. We'll have the information here in the next month or so, and then we'll have the tasks that run off it. Let's see. I mean, we might have oil at 200 by then, and we might all be living in caves. So let's see if it goes ahead. But hopefully, we will be talking about reporting rather than another crisis.
All right. Thank you for those wise words, Shamsi. What's your take on that?
Yeah, the worst segue in the world. I think nothing is kind of off the table at the moment, to be really honest. You've got very established regulations like EMIR, they're going through changes, and it's complex to kind of review something that you've got in place and make these changes into well-established processes. And then even though it's not financial per se, remit to reporting is the biggie. I guess if we link it to the financial side, the ability to manipulate the wholesale markets using the financial markets is one to kind of that's always being explored. And then you've got kind of Swiss remit and other kind of local regulations that are hard to horizon scan for and do assessments for, but I think it's just unfortunately the nature of the world that we work in.
All right, thanks. Now we have the time for the questions from the audience. So we've had one. So that reads, regarding the MAR updates, should we be worried about technical stores? If our data is correct, but our timing is slightly off due to the system lag, are regulators still open to dialogue, or are they moving towards an automated filing system?
I can go first. I think it's hard to think that it's going that way, or what each regulator's doing, because it goes to different regulators per country, and then they deal with it. So, I mean, I would always state that just be in open dialogue with the regulator, to be really honest. If you know that there's an issue, be proactive and message them in advance. And that way you can kind of mitigate any issues following any errors.
That's a good advice. Aviv, Paul, anything to add on that?
I don't know about automated fines and stores. Yeah, I think this is still going to be a dialogue situation. I would agree with what Shanda said. Yes,
but if on the other side of the fence, if we're looking kind of, we operate in RRM as well, and we're fully aware, like most market participants, on the remit side, that ACER has got a lot more money now to do a lot more investigations. So do expect them to use it.
That's also a good point. The other question that has come in is for mid-sized firms operating in both the UK and EU, the simplicity paradox is real. Are there any reporting middleware solutions or best practices the panel has seen that actually manage dual track reporting without doubling the compliance budget?
Well, yes, I'm sat here. Be lovely to speak to you, Dan.
All right. That was the short answer. Anything else?
I didn't want to give the big cheesy one, but it was just sat there. But,
yes. So yeah. I mean, yes. Delta Connex is one of the vendors that can help you with that, and there are others as well.
But they will remain nameless on this panel.
Yes, but they will. Yes, well. But yeah, there are others as well. And it's interesting actually. So talking about it from a sort of generic perspective, I've been involved in this for many years. And when every new round of reporting, people consider using a package such as Delta Connex or the others, and often they feel, no, we could do it ourselves and then it will be done, and then it never is. So I would say often it is worth the investment. It is an upfront investment. It usually pays off eventually.
From the vendor side, it's a long game. Everyone has the best intentions because they've got the experts, they know the business, and they want to own the data all the way through, full data lineage. And eventually it just becomes uneconomical to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. These are very good points indeed. Sorry. So thanks a lot for all your insights, Shanzi, Paul, and Aviv. It has been really, really interesting. That's all the time we have for today. So don't hesitate. I'm talking to the viewers now. Don't hesitate to reach out to our panelists if you'd like a follow-up discussion with them. I'm sure they'll be open for it. Next, we turn to the US for the final discussion of the ETRC online webinar to discuss power market governance and regulatory change. So that's going to be really interesting as well. So don't forget to tune in. All that's left to say is many thanks to you all and see you all very soon, either in person or online. Thanks a lot.
See you in Islington.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.